When we imagine governance, we often think of thrones, banners, and decrees. But for the Draco, governance has always been something slower, subtler, and older than paper or law. Their polity is not written in symbols but in cycles, gradients of heat and moisture, the timing of migrations, the rhythm of breeding seasons, the allocation of water and stone. To them, rule is not command, but stewardship. The Draco do not follow because of authority alone. They follow because survival depends on those who can read and regulate the flows of life. Their councils are not bound to palaces. They gather instead in the natural chambers of the world, in caverns where geothermal vents roar and pulse, where steam drifts upward like the breath of the earth, where decisions are measured with the patience of centuries. Other councils meet on high plateaus where air thins and horizons stretch vast, discussing the balances of migration, territory, and resource flows. Each council is tied to place. Each authority is responsible for a particular element: the aquifers and water tables, the cooled stone chambers where hibernation cycles are aligned, the prey herds that sustain populations, the fungal beds that renew soil. The Draco polity is a mosaic of stewards, woven together through ecology rather than conquest. Maps in Draco society are not drawn in hard lines. They are shaded in gradients of warmth, water, and fertility. To claim land is to claim its conditions, its springs, its prey corridors, its access to heat. Borders are not rigid. They expand in times of plenty, contract in times of scarcity. Authority rests not on a declaration, but on the ability to stabilize these flows when they shift. A poor decision in governance is not punished by rebellion or protest, but by ecological collapse. A diverted aquifer may dry out a chamber where thousands must breed. Mismanagement of heat may leave hibernation halls cold, forcing premature awakening in a hostile season. The Draco know this with certainty. To rule is to understand cycles, and to misunderstand them is to fail the entire system. That is why their decisions are glacially slow. Councils deliberate for decades, sometimes centuries, because only through long observation can cycles be trusted. This patience is not seen as weakness. It is the highest form of strength. A hasty decision is reckless. Silence is not avoidance, but discipline. For the Draco, wisdom is measured in waiting, in restraint, in the ability to listen to the slow tones of stone, steam, soil, and water. Their councils are not unlike orchestras, with each steward contributing a piece to the great balance, ensuring no single node hoards too much power. To outside observers, such governance may appear abstract. No armies, no decrees, no dramatic spectacles of authority. But to the Draco, it is more tangible than any human throne. Governance endures because it is distributed throughout the land itself. If a vent continues to roar, if a stream continues to flow, then governance continues. It cannot be destroyed by the death of one leader or the fall of one city, because it is not centralized in either. And so the Draco polity has endured. It is supple rather than brittle, cautious rather than impulsive, and resilient across the long timelines of their species. To them, governance is not a performance of power, but the cultivation of survival itself. It is a patient ecology of rule, unfolding across centuries, steady as the stone beneath their claws. For the Draco, survival has always meant more than territory or bloodline. It has meant mastery over the cycles that sustain them: water, heat, food, and the balance of waste returned to the earth. Their entire polity rests on the steady pulse of these cycles. Where humans may celebrate conquests or monuments, the Draco measure their prosperity by the flow of aquifers, the warmth of volcanic vents, and the renewal of prey herds across the centuries. Water stands at the center of their system. Collected from condensation basins, stored in underground cisterns, and redistributed through vast aqueducts carved into cliffside stone. Water is not only sustenance but regulation. It cools the breeding chambers when heat grows too fierce. It saturates the fungal farms that sustain their prey. It marks the difference between prosperity and collapse. To waste a drop is to violate the code of cycles itself. Heat is treated as both currency and inheritance. Volcanic vents and geothermal reservoirs are tapped, stored in great chambers of stone and circulated through canals of steam. The Draco are a species of scale and blood that can withstand extremes, yet even they must carefully manage warmth to align with their long hibernations. Too much heat, and their breeding cycles are disrupted. Too little, and they awaken into famine. Heat, in their society, is portioned like treasure, a resource weighed and measured with the same precision as any mineral vein. Food is managed through deliberate cultivation. Prey herds are guided along migration paths, their numbers watched and balanced. Excess hunting is forbidden, not through decree, but through the deep knowledge that scarcity will echo for centuries. Beneath the ground, fungal farms glow faintly in the dark, their spores providing rich sustenance, their damp soils renewing themselves as part of the cycle. The Draco do not divide sharply between wild and cultivated. Every living thing in their polity is woven into a continuum of care. Even waste is not discard, but conversion. The refuse of herds enriches the fungal beds. The cooled ash from volcanic furnaces is spread to renew depleted soils. The breath of hibernation chambers feeds moisture back into condensation systems. To the Draco, nothing is lost. Every output is an input. Their cities are less centers of consumption and more circulatory nodes in a planetary metabolism. It is this metabolism that grants their polity its stability. Because their decisions are made in decades and centuries, the cycles themselves can be preserved across eras. Where human societies might overdraw their resources in a single generation, the Draco discipline themselves to draw as slowly as the cycles allow. In their view, there is no separation between governance and ecology. To rule is to regulate the flows. Yet they know fragility as well. A single drought can echo for lifetimes. A vent that cools can leave entire populations without warmth. Their resilience lies not in preventing collapse, but in preparing for it, slowing, hibernating, redistributing until cycles return. In this way, resource management becomes not only survival, but a philosophy of patience, a belief that to endure, one must live within the cycles, not above them. This is the Draco economy. Water harvested with reverence, heat portioned like inheritance, food webs tended like gardens, waste folded back into creation. Nothing wasted, nothing hurried. A living ecology of rule, stretched across the long shadow of their centuries. In Draco society, ritual is not a matter of myth or worship. It is a system of synchronization. Where humans often separate the sacred from the practical, the Draco weave them into one continuous pattern. Ritual is how resource cycles are regulated, how breeding seasons are aligned, how migrations are coordinated, and how territories are redistributed without conflict. It is ceremony as governance, ecology written into rhythm. Every major cycle begins with ritual. The pouring of water from cistern to basin is not symbolic, but a signal that aquifers are ready to be opened for distribution. The venting of steam in grand plumes across council chambers is not spectacle, but confirmation that heat has been stored and balanced. The exchange of offerings, stone, hides, cured minerals, is not devotion, but ledger, ensuring that each community contributes what the cycles require. Breeding is one of the most carefully regulated through ritual. The timing of eggs, the alignment of hatcheries, the warmth of nesting chambers, all are determined by ceremonial gatherings. Elders mark the intervals with stone glyphs, each etched with patience, ensuring no cycle begins too soon or stretches too long. To break from these patterns would not merely upset tradition, it would ripple through the generations, leaving scarcity and imbalance in its wake. The same is true of territory. Ritual migrations redistribute herds and populations along the plateaus and valleys, preventing the exhaustion of any single region. At the appointed times, groups move as one, guided by carved markers and the glow of fire towers. The economy of movement is bound to rhythm. Migration without ritual would be chaos, but migration with ritual becomes balance. Trade, too, is folded into ceremony. Exchanges of cooled stone, of heat-bearing minerals, of hides, are not conducted in marketplaces, but in great halls where offerings are laid in concentric circles. Each item is both material and symbolic. To give is to sustain the cycle. To receive is to continue it. These exchanges are witnessed by councils not for authority, but for memory, ensuring that the pattern is never broken, that reciprocity remains intact. In this way, the Draco economy is not measured in coin or tally, but in the durability of cycles. Resources flow because ritual guarantees them. Ritual itself is an economy, a living contract between survival and rhythm. It is not abstract faith, but a practical binding. This fusion of economy and ceremony grants their polity cohesion across centuries. Even in times of collapse, fragments of the system survive because ritual carries memory forward. A single glyph etched into stone may guide a population back into rhythm after centuries of dormancy. A single offering placed in a dried basin may mark the return of water and the resumption of flow. To human eyes, these rituals might look like religion, yet for the Draco, they are something else. Ecology turned into ceremony. They are the living rhythm of survival, repeated generation after generation, ensuring that nothing is taken without return, that nothing begins without ending, that every flow is acknowledged in balance. Collapse for the Draco has never been a sudden or absolute event. It is not a single fall, not a moment of finality, but a series of cascading failures within the cycles they depend upon. When water falters, when heat shifts, when breeding is delayed too long, the entire rhythm of governance unravels. Collapse is ecological before it is political. It begins not with the rise of rebellion, but with the silence of streams, the cooling of vents, the emptying of migration paths. They have seen such collapses before, scattered across centuries, a drought lasting longer than memory, a vent sealed by seismic upheaval, a prey herd that never returned from migration. Each disruption echoes through the cycles, unraveling what was once balance. The great aqueducts run dry. Hibernation chambers crack with frost. Trade circles dissolve as offerings vanish. Rituals falter, not from neglect, but from the absence of resources to sustain them. Yet, the Draco do not treat collapse as the end. Their resilience lies in a philosophy of dormancy. When conditions falter, they slow. They retreat into the deep chambers carved long ago. Chambers where the air is cool and still, where water is conserved in silence, where hibernation can stretch for decades, even centuries. Populations shrink, but they do not vanish. Memory is stored in stone glyphs, in etched cycles, in ritual markers left waiting for renewal. The polity contracts into near silence, and then waits. When the cycles return, when rain falls again into the basins, when heat roars once more from the vents, when herds return to the canyons, the polity awakens, the rituals resume, the offerings flow, the migrations reassemble. Collapse is not finality but pause. It is interruption, not extinction. Their governance is not brittle, because it is never entirely broken. It bends into hibernation and then unfurls again when the cycles allow. This rhythm of collapse and renewal grants them a resilience alien to human civilizations. Where our empires fall into ruin and vanish into history, Theirs re-emerge from dormancy, guided by the old glyphs and the ecological memory etched into stone. Even fragments carry the codes of survival. A single valley holding water, a single vent carrying heat, a single herd migrating faithfully. Each is enough to seed the polity's return. Thus, collapse becomes part of the cycle itself, not feared, not denied, but acknowledged as inevitable. The strength of their polity lies in their ability to endure through silence, to treat absence as temporary, to survive not by constant expansion, but by patient return. In their eyes, resilience is not the avoidance of collapse, but the certainty of recovery after it. And so their civilization continues, not in a straight line, but in cycles, ebbing and flowing like the water they revere, like the heat they ration, like the migrations they guide. Always fragile, always enduring. A polity written into the slow rhythm of the earth itself. To understand the Draco is to step away from the stories we tell of empires and thrones. It is to see governance not as decree, but as ecology. Their polity endures not by force of arms or endless conquest, but by patience, by weaving themselves into the cycles of water, heat, food, and ritual. They are not rulers standing above the world, but stewards folded into its rhythm. Governance for them is the orchestration of flows. Power is not the command of others, but the ability to stabilize warmth and water across lifetimes. Resource cycles are not commodities, but sacred inheritances, portioned with the precision of centuries. Ritual is not belief, but synchronization, the binding of countless communities to the same slow rhythm. Even collapse is not failure, but silence, a pause that waits patiently until renewal comes. This way of life is alien to us, but perhaps it holds a mirror. Where our civilizations rise and fall in arcs of ambition and decay, theirs breathes like a living system, pulsing in expansions and contractions, never entirely gone. Where we build borders with lines, they draw them with gradients. Where we chase growth, they cultivate balance. Where we dread collapse, they prepare for return. To study the Draco is to imagine what governance might be if it were written not in paper or stone monuments, but in the deep cycles of the earth itself. It is to picture a society where politics is inseparable from ecology, where survival is measured not in years or reigns, but in the patient endurance of centuries. Perhaps that is their true legacy. Not domination, not empire, but resilience. A civilization that understands itself as part of the world's metabolism, folding itself into the slow turning of cycles. A polity not of conquest, but of continuity. A governance that survives because it listens, waits, and endures. And as we look upon this imagined ecology of rule, we might ask ourselves, if they endure by cycles, what do we endure by? What are the flows we neglect, and what would it mean to govern in rhythm with them? The Draco answer not with words, but with centuries of silence, with aqueducts that flow again, with vents that roar once more, with herds that return along old paths. Their polity is not a myth, but a lesson, one written not in the language of conquest, but in the ecology of survival itself.